Jon Stewart, we're going to talk about another media watchdog, Jon Stewart. He recently criticized Catherine Sabili and the Obama administration for problems with the Obamacare rollout. Many commenters said the administration was in real trouble. Stewart then pushed back, arguing that his criticism doesn't have any larger meaning in the political discourse or mean that he's taking sides, right? So he says he's just a comedian. Other people say, no, you're having a big impact. Here's what Howard Kurtz has to say about it.
This is a neat little game that Stewart plays. He wants to be a cutting-edge media and political critic. Remember the Rally for Sanity in Washington? And he's good at it. But if you say he's having an impact, he says, what? Come on, I don't have any influence. I'm just a guy telling smutty jokes on basic cable.
Look, making fun of something, that's nothing new for us. So don't act like us making jokes about a certain program or president is evidence that that politician or issue has reached some kind of tipping point for action. The point is this. Don't you use our jokes as evidence that the thing you hate must be stopped. Because I'm sure when we joke about you like, you're more than happy to ignore.
Jon Stewart making fun of Obamacare was a symbolic moment. The same with SNL mocking Kathleen Sebelius. But these things matter. Do we in the media overuse these clips to oversimplify issues? We're guilty, John. We're guilty.
Okay, so Howard Kurtz admitting that he's a piece of shit journalist, but still wants to make a point about Jon Stewart. Now, Jon Stewart's defense, when people give him more power than he said he wants, or says he wants, is his defense is that, hey, I'm a comedian. I've been doing what comedians have been doing since they invented comedy. This is what we do. Don't try to make this out to be more than it is. He has a point, doesn't he, Malcolm?
He does have a point, but I think, and I love Jon Stewart and enjoy his show, and I can't stand Howard Kurtz, but I think Howard Kurtz has a point also. I think it pains me physically to say that.
Me too.
Just to hear it. But I think, John, the problem is, and we talked about this in an earlier segment, which you should all go back and watch if you're only watching the segments instead of the full show. But the problem is with our larger media landscape, where we don't have a diversity of viewpoints, and like you were talking about having all the different newspapers who have all different perspectives and channels that are owned by a variety of different people. And so I feel like Jon Stewart, so much is put on him. He is our national bullshit detector, and he's got to do it all because nobody else is doing it. Nobody on CNN is doing it. Nobody on MSNBC is doing it. Nobody on Fox, obviously, is doing it. People online are doing it. But he's the only person in mainstream cable TV who's doing it. And so Howard Kurtz is right. He does have an influence.
Well, when people say that Jon Stewart has an influence, or they go, wow, he's really doing some good journalism with Jon Stewart, and I both say is that that doesn't mean Jon Stewart's a good journalism. That means the journalists are shitty.
Right.
And you have to turn to a comedian to get a modicum of truth in today's political discourse on television, which is the case, right? Because you look at MSNBC, people think they're skewed. Fox, people think they're skewed. People who say, I'm going to watch CNN, they're right down the middle. We've realized there's not two sides to the truth. So when people turn on television, the only place they can actually go where a person takes a fact, draws a conclusion, and tells you about it is a goddamn comedy show. I don't have a question, John. Say something.
Well, look, I'll preface this by saying that I absolutely love Jon Stewart. He's kind of my idol when it comes to journalism, actually, the way that he does it, the focus on bullshit, the focus on pointing out hypocrisy. But I do think that here he's being incredibly disingenuous. Both objectively, he does have an influence. I mean, you all remember I'm sure, the first responders bill that was basically pushed through because of him. So objectively, he's wrong, and I also think that he knows that he has an influence, and I think he's trying to have an influence. For the most part, his show is, as you say, it's comedy-focused, and the way that he does his comedy is through journalism. But very often, he does shows that are clearly journalism-focused, and he happens to make jokes. I mean, when he focuses on an entire show on one particular issue, he is trying to advance an agenda. I don't have a problem with that. And I do think that if we had a more capable media, he would not stand out in the way that he does. The fact that they do reveal, they have apparently the best archive of footage of politicians talking in the history of the world. They point out the hypocrisy. They follow up with people. Just last week, I think it was, they had the voter ID. They showed the obvious racial and political underpinnings of voter ID laws. They got that guy taken out of office because of that. He does have an influence. He wants to have an influence. But again, him attacking Obamacare, what the fuck does that mean? If Bill O'Reilly's in favor of it, does that mean that's a watershed moment? No, they wouldn't say that either.
Right.
I think it's really fascinating because people were actually using it as evidence that someone should be fired, right? So it's like, he thinks this, oh, that we have to fire that person. And when I think it's absolutely true that he has influence over what people think, what perceptions of things are, for sure. But him having a viewpoint on something, I don't think relates to someone in our government. Like, that's not evidence they should be fired. I think that it's taken completely, you know, to another level.
Well, when they're saying that, look, even Jon Stewart is criticizing it, what that is saying, what's that implying is Jon Stewart never criticizes Barack Obama or the Obama administration, which is the difference between a true comedian and a hack. A true comedian makes fun of power no matter what political party, which is what Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert do. Yeah. And the people who aren't on his, who don't agree with his politics can't understand that. Like, why would you criticize people you agree with just because they're wrong temporarily? So that blows their mind, and that's what he actually does. He's an actual comedian, and that's what they actually supposed to do. Otherwise, you're not a comedian. You're a bullshitter, and you're supposed to be making fun of yourself at that point.
And that's why Red Eye sucks, and the equivalent of the Daily Show they tried to run on Fox News sucks, because they can't do that. They can't attack their side.
Right.
Not in an honest fashion.
Not in an honest fashion.
They will attack their side only when they deviate from the very carefully selected talking points and philosophy.
Yes, yes.
But they can't actually point out their own foibles.
As I've said before, conservatives don't do comedy. They're the reason we need comedy in the first fucking place.
Yeah, conservatives are the source material.
Yeah,
They're a very important part of comedy.
Yes.
Them and Joe Biden.